In the early 1990s, the personal computer was an awkward, thrilling machine. It was loud, beige, and stubborn. It did not want to do what you asked, not without coaxing, commands, and compromises. And yet it was becoming a place where an entire culture could gather. Teenagers swapping disks in school hallways, hobbyists dialing into bulletin board systems at night, office workers secretly installing games after hours, and programmers trading tricks like musicians trading chords. Graphics cards were limited, sound was a luxury, and the idea of a fast, smooth action game on a common home computer still felt slightly unreal. That unreality was exactly where its software loved to work. It was not born as a traditional studio. It formed around a small group of young developers who had learned, partly by necessity and partly by obsession, how to squeeze spectacle out of strict hardware. Before Doom, they had already made the PC feel faster than it had any right to feel. The Commander Keen games proved that the machine could scroll like a console. Wolfenstein 3D proved that a first-person viewpoint could be more than a novelty. It could be immediate, readable, and violent in a way that made other action games seem distant. But Wolfenstein also carried obvious limits: a maze of right angles, flat floors, identical ceiling heights, a world made of rigid boxes. It was a breakthrough, and it was a boundary. The next step would not be another maze, it would be a place. Doom begins as a technical ambition, but it is also a mood. It is the decision to set a certain kind of nightmare loose inside a computer, then to make that nightmare move at a speed that feels like thought. The most famous description of Doom is that it invents or perfects the first-person shooter, but that is neat, tidy history. In reality, Doom is more like an engine of persuasion. It persuades you that you are somewhere else, that space has weight, that light matters, that distance matters, that sound behind you matters. It persuades you that a corridor is a threat even when it is empty. It persuades you that the walls have secrets, and that the greatest danger is not what you can see, but what you have almost seen. To understand how Doom could do that, it helps to understand the people who made it and the peculiar chemistry of their working life. John Carmack was the chief architect, the programmer whose focus on performance had already reshaped what PC games could look like and how they could feel. He was driven by the clean certainty of an elegant solution, the belief that if you could describe a problem correctly, you could solve it, and if you could solve it, you could make it run fast enough to matter. John Romero was a designer and programmer with a different kind of intensity, one that came out as speed, flair, and a sense for what players would do when you gave them tools and temptations. Tom Hall was a designer with a love for story and texture, someone who wanted the world to have internal logic, characters, and a readable arc. Adrian Carmack and Kevin Cloud provided the visual identity, shaping demons and machinery into a coherent mess of flesh, steel, bone, and rust. And later, Sandy Peterson would arrive as a level designer with a sharp sense for rhythm and surprise. Bobby Prince would provide music and sound with a knack for catchy aggression and ominous pulse. Around them was a small team that worked like a band on tour. Long hours, shared jargon, arguments that sounded like philosophy but were really about feel, and an appetite for risk that only looks inevitable in hindsight. The original spark for Doom is often described as a collision. On one side is the team's love of science fiction action, of marines and corridors and locked doors that open into disaster. On the other side is their love of horror, of demons and possession, and the simple primal shock of something moving wrong in the dark. Doom is, in the most direct sense, demons versus technology, a premise that allows the player to move through environments that feel industrial and plausible, while fighting enemies that feel ancient and sacrilegious. That contrast does more than decorate the game. It is what the game's world is made of. Every room is either a human attempt to impose order or the chaotic answer to that attempt. Every switch is a little prayer to machinery. Every monster is the reminder that something has listened. Early in development, Doom could have been something else. There were ideas about using an existing license, about leaning harder into a recognizable movie-like setting, about making something closer to a narrative campaign you could describe like a traditional action film. Tom Hall in particular envisioned a stronger story framework with named characters, more explicit motivations, and a more guided structure. His design document, often discussed as a window into that early phase, described a Doom with more overt science fiction world-building, a sense of mission that would read on the surface rather than in the gaps. But Doom, the Doom most people remember, did not become that game. It became leaner, stranger, and more reliant on the player's imagination. This difference was not merely a creative preference. It reflected a deeper argument about what mattered most in an action game. Carmack is frequently associated with a blunt principle. Story in a game should be present in the way story exists in certain kinds of movies, as an excuse, a tone, a framing device, but never an obstacle. The game should not pause to tell you what to do. It should give you a world that makes you want to do something. Romero, while not indifferent to atmosphere, tended to agree that momentum was sacred. Hall wanted coherence and narrative. Doom's final form is the product of that clash, and also the product of time, pressure, and ambition. When the team committed to making their engine more advanced, more flexible, more alive than Wolfenstein's, they also committed to a kind of design that would reward speed. A heavier story structure would have required more content, more scripting, more explicit exposition, more systems to support it. Doom would keep its story skeletal, almost mythic, a marine, a base, a breach, and a descent. The technology enabled that myth to feel real. The Doom engine is sometimes explained as a set of tricks, a clever cheat that creates the illusion of three-dimensional space without actually calculating a full three-dimensional world. But to call it a cheat misses what made it powerful. It was not simply an illusion, it was a new vocabulary for space on the PC. Doom's levels were built from sectors, areas with floor heights, ceiling heights, and light levels. Walls could meet at angles that were not right angles. Floors could rise, drop, and form staircases. Rooms could feel like places instead of grid puzzles. The engine could not truly stack rooms on top of each other in the way later fully three-dimensional engines could, but it created spaces complex enough that most players did not think in those terms. What they felt was elevation, depth, and the sense that the world could surprise them. Lighting was one of the key ingredients in that surprise. Doom did not calculate light as a realistic simulation, but it treated brightness as a design tool. Rooms could glow, corridors could dim, and flickering or shifting light could suggest danger or conceal a secret. Darkness became an enemy that did not need hit points. And because Doom was fast, because movement was smooth and immediate, light changes read not as decoration, but as information. The world told you how to feel with its shadows. The engine also encouraged a modular approach to data. Levels, textures, sprites, and other elements were stored in packages that could be swapped without rewriting the code. This separation of engine and content mattered not only to id's workflow, but to the community that would later form around Doom. It meant Doom could be modified, reassembled, and reinvented by people who had never stepped inside id's office. It also meant the developers themselves could iterate quickly. That speed of iteration is one of the hidden stories of Doom's production, the ability to test an idea, feel its impact, and revise it before it calcified into dogma. The tools used to build Doom were themselves part of the story. The team developed on NXT computers running NXT Step, machines that offered a development environment Carmack valued for productivity and stability. While Doom would ship for common DOS-based PCs, much of its creation happened on sleek black workstations in an ecosystem that felt almost futuristic compared to the average player's setup. This contrast is poetic in its own way. A game about slipping from human technology into hell was built on machines that looked like props from a high-end science fiction set. If the engine was a vocabulary, then level design was Doom's grammar. And here, Doom's internal history becomes messy in the most human way. John Romero designed the entirety of the first episode's levels, which serve as Doom's opening argument. The first episode, set on a Martian moon base, is the game's handshake and its threat. It teaches you how to move, how to shoot, how to read a room, and how to suspect every wall. Romero's style emphasizes flow, the sense that you are being pulled forward by curiosity and fear at the same time. The levels are not only arenas, they are persuaders. They persuade you that exploration is safe, then punish you for believing it too much. They teach you to search for keys and secrets while being constantly aware that a door you open may also be a door that opens you. But Doom is bigger than its first episode, and the later episodes had to be built while the game was still in motion, still changing, still being argued over. Tom Hall's departure created both a practical gap and an emotional rupture. Developing a game like Doom is not only a matter of making assets and code, it is a matter of shared belief. When a key contributor leaves, the team does not simply lose labor, it loses a voice in the conversation about what the game is supposed to be. That conversation does not stop, it becomes sharper. Sandy Peterson arrived late in development and produced an astonishing amount of work in a short time, creating much of the second and third episodes. His levels tend to feel different from Romero's. Where Romero often creates a forward pull, Peterson is more willing to twist the player around, to force reorientation, to create spaces that feel like traps you accidentally volunteered to enter. Doom is often praised for its immediacy, but Peterson's contribution is a reminder that immediacy is not the same as simplicity. A Doom level can be read at speed, but it can also be labyrinthine, cruel, and confusing in the exact way a nightmare is confusing. You know you are being tested, you know the test is unfair, and you cannot stop moving. This is also where Doom's monsters become more than targets. They become level design tools. Doom's bestiary is not huge by modern standards, but it is carefully tuned for interaction and escalation. The weakest enemies are not simply weak. They are numerous. They are positioned to interrupt your aim, and they are placed to make you waste resources. The stronger enemies are not simply sponges for damage. They alter how you move, how you choose terrain, and what you prioritize in the chaos. The presence of a single dangerous enemy in a room can turn the entire architecture into a puzzle. Which pillar will block line of sight? Which doorway becomes a funnel? Which corner becomes a death sentence? This interplay between monsters and space may be the most important design achievement of Doom's development. It is not just shooting, it is choreography. And the developers were building that choreography while the game's identity was still hardening. Doom was meant to be violent and fast, but it was also meant to be readable. With Wolfenstein, the rules were simple. Enemies in hallways, doors as gates, keys as progression locks. Doom widened the space of possibility. Fights could happen across multiple elevations, ambushes could be staged with closets and teleport traps, and the player could be attacked from angles that felt unfair until they felt inevitable. The designers learned how to orchestrate surprise, then they learned how to make surprise feel like your fault. Multiplayer was another dimension of that learning. Doom did not merely include multiplayer as a feature, it helped define the social image of PC gaming in a new way. Cooperative play let players experience levels as a shared panic, a kind of tactical friendship where someone always had to be the brave idiot who went first. Deathmatch, meanwhile, was a new kind of chaos. It turned Doom's weapons into arguments between players. It turned map knowledge into power. It turned the corridors into hunting grounds. The idea of deathmatch would spread and mutate through the industry until it became a default language of competitive play. But in Doom, it still had the freshness of a discovery, the feeling that the game's violence had found a new purpose when the demons were replaced by your friends. If Doom's design arguments were mostly about speed and feel, Doom's production arguments were about time. The team worked with a kind of intensity that has become legend. Long weeks, nights in the office, the sense of sprinting toward a deadline that kept moving. There was also the particular stress of anticipation. Doom was not a secret project that shared updates online, fed a growing hunger, and watched rumors turn into expectation. The early internet culture around PC games was still small enough that the developers and the audience could feel unusually close, like performers and fans in the same club rather than separated by an arena. That closeness created excitement, but it also created pressure. When the game slipped past earlier targets, people noticed. They called, they complained, they begged. Many of them felt in a strange way like they had a personal stake in Doom arriving, as if they were waiting for a new piece of hardware or a new season of weather rather than a piece of software. The release was shaped by id's approach to distribution, and this approach was as revolutionary in its own way as the engine. Doom's first episode was distributed as shareware, intended to spread freely and widely. Players could get a substantial portion of the game, copy it and share it, and if they wanted the full experience, they could register and purchase the complete version directly. This model treated players not only as customers but as carriers. The community became a delivery system. Doom did not only arrive, it propagated. When the shareware episode was first uploaded, it was not released in a neat retail ceremony. It was pushed onto the internet, into a real server with real limitations, and the demand was so intense that the distribution itself became part of the story. The release was a kind of digital stampede. The game is not yet mainstream in the modern sense, but within its world it felt like a major event, a thing people gathered for, stayed up for, talked about as it happened. And then, almost immediately, Doom became a problem for institutions. It spread through schools and offices. It spread through dorms and computer labs. It ran on machines that were not meant, culturally, to host demons and shotguns. It became the kind of game people installed to test whether a computer was worth owning, and also the kind of game administrators tried to remove because it made people forget the purpose of the machine. Doom was fast enough and exciting enough that it created a familiar modern phenomenon, the software that eats time. It did not just entertain, it colonized attention. But Doom's impact was not only social, it was aesthetic. It changed what players expected from space, sound, and violence in games. It changed the baseline. Once you have moved through Doom's corridors, once you have felt the rhythm of opening a door and hearing an enemy you cannot yet see, it becomes difficult to return to slower, flatter worlds. The game taught players to crave immediacy. It also taught developers that immediacy could be engineered. Part of Doom's enduring fascination is that it feels both authored and open. The levels are deliberate, but they invite mastery. The weapons feel iconic, but they also feel like tools that could be used in 100 different styles. The monsters are grotesque, but they are also readable silhouettes designed for quick recognition in motion. Doom is not just a story about a marine fighting hell. It is a story about a small team building a system that could generate stories in the player's head, again and again, with different outcomes depending on skill, curiosity, and fear. The release was shaped by id's approach to distribution, and this approach was as revolutionary in its own way as the engine. Doom's first episode was distributed as shareware, intended to spread freely and widely. Players could get a substantial portion of the game, copy it, and share it. And if they wanted the full experience, they could register and purchase the complete version directly. This model treated players not only as customers, but as carriers. The community became a delivery system. Doom did not only arrive, it propagated. When the shareware episode was first uploaded, it was not released in a neat retail ceremony. It was pushed onto the internet, into a real server with real limitations, and the demand was so intense that the distribution itself became part of the story. The release was a kind of digital stampede. The game was not yet mainstream in the modern sense, but within its world it felt like a major event, a thing people gathered for, stayed up for, talked about as it happened. And then, almost immediately, Doom became a problem for institutions. It spread through schools and offices. It spread through dorms and computer labs. It ran on machines that were not meant culturally to host demons and shotguns. It became the kind of game people installed to test whether a computer was worth owning, and also the kind of game administrators tried to remove because it made people forget the purpose of the machine. Doom was fast enough and exciting enough that it created a familiar modern phenomenon, the software that eats time. It did not just entertain, it colonized attention. But Doom's impact was not only social, it was aesthetic. It changed what players expected from space, sound, and violence in games. It changed the baseline. Once you have moved through Doom's corridors, once you have felt the rhythm of opening a door and hearing an enemy you cannot yet see, it becomes difficult to return to slower, flatter worlds. The game taught players. Doom arrives as a finished game, but it behaves like a beginning. By the time the dust settles, Doom is no longer merely Doom. It is a language other games will borrow. It is a yardstick other engines will be measured against. It is a set of expectations that will shape level design, multiplayer, modding, and even the business of distribution. It is also, paradoxically, still intimate, the feeling of being alone in a humming base with a shotgun and a doorway, and the knowledge that something on the other side is waiting for you to blink. This is where the door to hell opens. The first thing Doom teaches is not a rule, it teaches a bodily sensation. You press forward and the world responds with a kind of crisp obedience that was rare at the time, and in its own way still rare. Movement in Doom is not dressed up as realism. It is not slowed down to simulate weight. It is not interrupted by little animations of hands fumbling with gear. It is immediate. It is decisive. When you change direction, the turn happens now. When you commit to a sprint, the momentum feels like you have become a projectile. And because the game is built around that responsiveness, every other system is tuned to match. Doom is speed designed by people who believed speed could be a philosophy. There is a common misunderstanding about Doom, that it is simple because it is old. In practice, Doom is simple in the way a well-made tool is simple. You can describe it quickly, but once you use it, you realize it invites skill, it invites choices, it invites different kinds of play, each of them legitimate, each of them expressive. Doom's mechanics are not numerous, but they are concentrated. They create pressure without clutter. They offer variety without menus. They do not ask you to manage a character sheet. They ask you to manage your nerves. The foundational loop is clear. You enter a space, you read it in a glance. Doors, windows, pillars, stairs, corners, shadows. You make a plan that lasts about a second. Then the plan collides with reality, because Doom is a game of interruptions. A door slides open behind you, a wall hisses and reveals a hidden room. A hallway you assumed was safe becomes a funnel for enemies. Doom's gameplay is not built on the steady execution of a plan. It is built on adaptation. It is built on learning to move in ways that turn danger into tempo. The controls in their original era were shaped by the keyboard-first reality of PC gaming. Many players began with turning and moving on the arrow keys, firing with control, using space to activate doors and switches, and holding an alternate key to strafe. That scheme sounds archaic to modern hands, but Doom's responsiveness made it workable, and its design encouraged players to graduate quickly into more sophisticated movement. Strafe is not an optional technique in Doom, it is the act of becoming competent. Running and strafing together turns the player from a person walking through corridors into something closer to a skater, gliding at angles and cutting corners with a sense of momentum that feels like a signature. Doom's levels are built to reward that motion. The rooms are arenas with lanes and cover. The corridors are not merely connections, they are sightlines and traps. In later years, many players associated Doom more strongly with a different control philosophy, the one that would become standard for first-person games, turning with the mouse, strafing with keys, moving forward with a key that becomes muscle memory. Some of that was already possible in Doom's original versions, but what matters is not the exact layout of inputs. What matters is that Doom's design assumes you will become comfortable moving quickly. It assumes that movement is your primary defense. There is no cover system. There is no leaning. There is no shield that absorbs mistakes for you. There is armor, yes, and health, yes, and power-ups that can make you briefly feel invincible. But fundamentally, Doom expects you to dodge. Dodging in Doom is distinct because of how the game treats verticality. Doom's world has height, stairs, lifts, ledges, and platforms. Enemies can stand above you and below you. Projectiles can arc through space. But your own aim is locked to a horizontal plane, assisted by a kind of auto-aim that snaps your shots toward targets at different heights when they are reasonably aligned. This decision is sometimes described as a limitation, but it is also a discipline, and disciplines shape style. Doom's combat becomes about lateral movement and spatial positioning rather than precise vertical targeting. You are not scanning roofs, you are scanning corners. You are not picking off enemies like a sniper, you are managing a crowd like a dancer in a knife fight. Because of this, Doom's arenas are designed to be read at speed. Enemy silhouettes are strong and immediately recognizable. Attacks are readable. The game's famous violence is not only gore, it is clarity. Doom is not trying to confuse you with fine detail. It is trying to overwhelm you with situations and then give you just enough information to survive them. Weapons are the verbs Doom gives you, and Doom's verbs are brutal, distinct, and thoughtfully paced. You begin with a pistol, a weapon that feels intentionally inadequate. Its rhythms are small and patient. It suggests that you are under-equipped, that you are improvising. The pistol is Doom's baseline, and the game quickly teaches you that living at baseline is not the point. The moment you acquire the shotgun, Doom's personality locks into place. The shotgun is not merely stronger, it is satisfying in a way that becomes almost pedagogical. It teaches you what Doom wants combat to feel like: a decisive blast, a punch of sound, a quick recoil, and an enemy that reacts with a visible flinch. In many shooters, a shotgun is a situational tool. In Doom, it is a declaration. Close distance, take control, make the room yours. From there, the arsenal becomes a ladder of appetites. The chain gun turns single targets into a stream of decisions. Keep firing to stun-lock an enemy, or release the trigger to reposition, or sweep the stream across a crowd to thin it out. The rocket launcher changes the geometry of combat. It turns corridors into dangerous commitments because splash damage punishes panic. It turns groups into opportunities. It makes you think in terms of space between bodies rather than bodies alone. The plasma gun introduces sustained power, a weapon that feels like you have found the base's forbidden heart, pure energy turned into a hose. And then there is the BFG, whose myth is built partly on its raw strength and partly on the way it changes your posture. The BFG is not a gun you use casually. When you pull it out, you are deciding that this room is important enough to spend rare ammunition, that the fight has crossed a line. Doom's best weapons are not just powerful, they are dramatic. But Doom is careful with drama. It does not hand you your full arsenal immediately, and it does not keep you supplied without making you work for it. Doom's resource economy is one of the main reasons its combat stays tense across long play sessions. Ammunition types create subtle constraints. You can have too many bullets when you need shells. You can have rockets when the room is too tight to safely use them. You can have the perfect weapon, but not enough health to take the risks required to wield it properly. The best Doom players do not merely shoot well, they budget. That budgeting extends beyond ammo to a whole ecology of pickups. Stim packs and medikits, small and large health boosts, create a rhythm of attrition and recovery. Armor gives you the confidence to push forward, but it also tempts you into mistakes. Power-ups are the game's moments of indulgence. Invulnerability that turns you into a wrecking ball for a brief, glorious span. Invisibility that makes enemies miss and allows a kind of sneaky aggression. Radiation suits that let you wade through toxic floors. Berserk that turns your fist into a weapon of humiliation and free healing into the bargain. These items are not random rewards. They are placed as invitations to change tempo. Doom's designers often put a power-up where it will make you bold at exactly the moment boldness is most dangerous. The result is a recurring emotional trick. You feel empowered, you act empowered, and then you discover that empowerment was part of the trap. Doom's difficulty settings are famous not only because they change enemy counts and damage pressures, but because their names communicate attitude. They feel like dares, like jokes at your expense, like a challenge delivered with a grin. Doom does not flatter you with difficulty labels that sound neutral. It teases you, it provokes you, it makes you want to prove something, which is exactly the kind of emotional fuel a fast action game runs on. And since the higher difficulties can be genuinely punishing, the teasing becomes meaningful. Doom's challenge is not abstract, it is felt in the palms. The real brilliance, though, is how Doom creates complexity from enemy behavior without relying on complicated artificial intelligence. Doom's monsters are not thinkers. They do not coordinate in sophisticated ways. They have patterns. How they move, when they attack, how they respond to pain, how quickly they close distance. But those patterns collide with level geometry and player behavior to create situations that feel intelligent. A demon that simply runs at you becomes terrifying in a narrow hallway. A projectile enemy that would be manageable in an open area becomes lethal when it can fire from behind other bodies. A slow, heavy monster becomes a wall if the room is designed so that you cannot easily circle it. Doom's AI is not trying to outsmart you in a chess sense. It is trying to herd you into panic, and panic is always smarter than you are. Sound is one of Doom's most underrated systems. The obvious function of sound is atmosphere. The metallic clank of doors, the wet growl of demons, the echo of distant screams, the punch of the shotgun, the hiss of a lift, the thump of a switch. These sounds make the world feel present. But sound is also mechanics. In Doom, noise travels through the map in a way that can wake enemies even if they cannot see you. A gunshot does not just kill something, it announces you. This creates a subtle strategic layer. Silent play is limited but not meaningless. Choosing when to fire and where can change how quickly a level becomes fully hostile. More importantly, it creates suspense. Sometimes you open a door, fire a shot, and hear movement beyond walls you cannot yet access. The map becomes haunted by the consequences of your own actions. That haunting is reinforced by Doom's approach to enemy activation. Monsters can be dormant until they see you or hear you, and once they are active, they behave like a tide. You may not see them immediately, but you can often feel them approaching through sound cues and the knowledge that the level has woken up. Doom creates tension not only through what is on screen, but through what is implied, the sense of unseen motion in the architecture. And then Doom adds one of the most memorable emergent behaviors in classic shooters, infighting. Enemies that are struck by attacks not meant for them may decide that the attacker is now their target, even if that attacker is another monster. This one rule creates a cascade of dramatic possibilities. A room full of demons can become a battlefield you can manipulate, baiting attacks, dodging at the right moment, letting hostile factions thin each other out. Infighting is not a gimmick, it is a pressure valve. It gives skilled players a way to survive overwhelming odds without simply inflating their own power. It also gives Doom a special kind of chaos, the sense that hell is not unified, that it is a swarm of hungers that can turn on itself. If movement is your defense and weapons are your verbs, then level design is the language that tells you what kind of sentence you're about to speak. Doom's levels are built around keys and gates, colored key cards and skull keys that open deeper parts of a map. This could have been a purely artificial structure, a video game excuse for locked doors. But Doom uses keys as a way to create loops. You push forward to a locked door. You backtrack through areas that have changed. You discover that the route you took earlier is now filled with enemies that were dormant or hidden. The map becomes a living machine. You learn it not as a static blueprint, but as a set of transformations. The use mechanic, a simple activation of doors and switches, becomes surprisingly expressive because Doom's designers love to hide consequences. Pressing a switch may open a door across the level. It may raise a staircase. It may lower a wall to reveal a secret. It may release enemies behind you. In Doom, a switch is a promise, and sometimes the promise is a lie. This is why Doom players develop a particular habit. They listen after pressing a switch. They listen for doors. They listen for lifts. They listen for something moving that they cannot see. The game teaches you to become suspicious of your own progress. Secrets are a major pillar of Doom's appeal, and they reshape how people play. Doom's levels are filled with hidden rooms, false walls, misaligned textures, suspicious lights, and corridors that only open if you press a particular panel. These secrets are not merely extra items. They are a second game layered on top of the first, a game of attention. The player who wants to survive can rush forward and accept whatever resources the main path provides. The player who wants to master Doom learns to study the environment, to notice patterns, to interpret visual hints, to experiment. Secret hunting changes the tempo from pure adrenaline to a kind of forensic curiosity. Doom even formalizes this curiosity with its end-of-level statistics. After completing a map, you are shown a brief summary of how thoroughly you played, how many enemies you killed, how many items you collected, how many secrets you found, expressed as percentages that invite obsession. This is a small design choice with enormous psychological impact. It turns completionism into a ritual. It turns replay into a natural response rather than an artificial demand. You finish a level, you see that you missed something, and a small part of your brain refuses to rest until you correct that record. The game does not need achievements. It does not need a modern progression framework. It uses the simplest possible feedback to create desire. The automap supports this desire. It is utilitarian, lines and angles, a functional sketch of where you have been and what you have not yet explored. But because Doom's spaces are often complex, and because routes loop back on themselves, the automap becomes a tool for strategy and memory. It is a way to plan. It is also a way to catch the designers in their tricks. A secret corridor might show up as an unexplained line. A suspicious void might suggest a hidden chamber. The map does not solve the puzzle for you, but it encourages you to ask better questions. Combat and exploration in Doom are not separate phases. They bleed into each other. A hallway you cleared may become dangerous again because you are low on ammo and a new monster has arrived. A secret you found may be protected by a trap that costs you health, meaning the reward must justify the risk. Doom constantly asks you to weigh greed against survival. Many of its most memorable moments are built on that equation. The tantalizing sight of a powerful weapon behind bars, the decision to chase it, the sudden punishment for committing. This is where Doom's pacing becomes genius. It uses contrast. Quiet stretches are not safe stretches. They are stretches where you are allowed to build dread. Then the game breaks that dread with violence. But even the violence is varied. Some encounters are small, a few enemies in a corridor. Some are ambushes that flood you with bodies and force you to retreat. Some are arena fights where the room itself is the challenge, with pillars you must use for cover, staircases you must use for elevation, and choke points you must either defend or avoid. Doom rarely relies on a single kind of fight for too long. It rotates stress. It changes the shape of danger. A key part of this rotation is the difference between hit-scan enemies and projectile enemies. Some enemies fire attacks that travel instantly, punishing careless exposure. Others throw fireballs or launch projectiles that move through space, punishing predictable movement. This mix encourages dynamic dodging. You cannot simply stray forever in one direction. A projectile will lead you. You cannot simply hide behind a corner forever. A hit-scan enemy will chip you down the moment you peek. Doom turns every room into an argument between these attack types and your ability to respond. Doom also uses surprise as a structural element. Doors open behind you, monsters teleport, walls lower, floors rise. The level itself seems to rearrange to keep you unsettled. But the surprise is not arbitrary. The best Doom traps are teachable. They are shocking the first time, but once you know them, they become solvable problems. This is crucial. Doom generates fear, but it also generates mastery. The player who returns to a level does not simply repeat it, they reinterpret it. They remember where the ambush is, and that memory changes how they move. Doom is a horror game that transforms into a performance game, and that transformation is part of its longevity. Even Doom's interface contributes to this feeling of embodied play. The status bar gives you key information, but it also gives you a face. The Marine's expression shifting as you take damage, glancing side to side as if listening for threats, occasionally flashing a pained reaction. This is not necessary for gameplay, and yet it is psychologically potent. It anchors you. It makes the damage feel personal. It turns health into more than a number. It becomes a mood. When your face is bloodied, you do not merely know you are in trouble. You feel watched by your own suffering. Music is another kind of anchoring. Doom's soundtrack, delivered through the language of MIDI on many systems, is aggressive, rhythmic, and persistent. It does not behave like modern cinematic scoring that swells and fades to guide emotion. It behaves like propulsion. The music does not apologize for itself. It strides forward and dares you to keep pace. And because the soundtrack can sound different on different hardware, it also becomes part of Doom's folklore. People remember Doom not only as a set of levels, but as a particular timbre from their own sound card, their own speakers, their own room at night. All of this is the single-player experience. But Doom's gameplay identity is incomplete without the way it handles multiplayer. Cooperative Doom turns levels into shared puzzles and shared panic. It changes the economy of resources because two players can cover more ground, but they can also consume supplies faster. It turns monsters into a different kind of obstacle, not only enemies to kill, but distractions that can separate teammates. It creates moments of accidental comedy, like one player sprinting ahead and triggering a trap that showers the other player with consequences. Cooperative Doom feels like a story generator because it creates blame and rescue, bravado and caution, the rhythm of wait for me and go, go, go. Deathmatch, on the other hand, reveals Doom's combat as a pure instrument. The maps become hunting grounds, the weapons become arguments for dominance, knowledge becomes a kind of muscle. To know where the rocket launcher is, where the plasma gun spawns, where the best choke points are, is to possess power that cannot be taken from you by a single lucky shot. Doom's deathmatch is foundational because it is not slow or polite. It is intimate and ruthless. It makes you feel the level design as an ecosystem of speed, lines of sight, and resource control. In deathmatch, a corridor is not a corridor, it is a risk profile. This is why Doom's gameplay has endured even as technology has changed. Many games have better graphics, many games have more complex systems, many games have more elaborate stories, but Doom's core is still difficult to replace. A fusion of speed, clarity, and spatial pressure that creates constant decision-making without constant explanation. Doom trusts the player to learn through action. It trusts you to fail and to come back sharper. And because it trusts you, it creates a particular kind of player sensation. The feeling that you are not watching violence, you are conducting it. The feeling that a room is solved not by patience, but by movement. The feeling that fear is not an emotion you endure, but a resource you convert into attention. Doom's story is both more present and more evasive than people remember. It is not delivered through long scenes or spoken dialogue. It arrives as a tone, a premise, a handful of intermission texts, and a manual that frames your first steps with grim comedy and a sense of doomed inevitability. The result is that Doom feels like a world you fall into rather than a tale you are told. And that difference matters, because Doom's narrative method is really an extension of its gameplay philosophy. Keep the player moving, keep the world suggestive, and let imagination do the expensive work. The manual's opening situates you as a Marine who has already made a moral choice. You were punished for hitting a superior officer who ordered an atrocity. You are shipped off to Mars, to dead-end duty, to a company-run system of bases and secrecy. The Union Aerospace Corporation is described as a vast organization with facilities on Mars and its moons, and it is tied to radioactive waste and military contracts. Over a period of years, its remote outposts become a testbed for experiments in interdimensional travel. The language is blunt and pulpy: gateways, volunteers, instability, madness, and something coming through that should never have been invited. Then the situation tips from ominous to immediate. A message comes from the base on Phobos. The systems fail. The rest of your team goes in, and you are ordered to secure the perimeter. You listen to gunfire and screams over the radio until there is only silence. When you finally step inside, you are entering a place where human technology is still running, but human control is already gone. This is, in miniature, Doom's entire approach to story. You begin after the disaster has started. You do not get to prevent it. You do not get to save the squad. Doom's heroism is not about arriving in time. It is about arriving at all, looking at the ruined machines, and walking deeper anyway. The manual even rubs salt in the wound by emphasizing that the heavy weapons were taken by the assault team, leaving you initially under-equipped. In Doom, scarcity is not just balance, it is theme. You are always one step behind the catastrophe, scavenging power from the remains of people who died faster than you. Once the game begins, the story becomes environmental: computers, toxic pits, industrial corridors, warning stripes, and doors that seal like airlocks. You are not told in a neat plot outline what UAC was trying to do. You feel it in the architecture. The base on the moons is utilitarian and repetitive, the way real infrastructure is repetitive. The keycards suggest bureaucratic control. The locked doors suggest security procedures. The blinking panels suggest systems still attempting to behave. And then, as you progress, Doom lets hell leak in. The technology becomes corrupted by symbols, by flesh, by impossible textures grafted onto concrete and steel. Doom's narrative is the gradual replacement of the human-made world with a world that does not share human priorities. This shift is formalized by Doom's episode structure. The first episode is a descent through a tech base that still resembles a military-industrial installation. The second pushes further into spaces that feel less stable, more invaded. The third drops you into an infernal realm where the architecture itself seems to mock human geometry. The game's few intermission texts punctuate those transitions, giving you a sense of destination without slowing your momentum. Doom does not care whether you can recite its plot. It cares whether you feel its trajectory, from control to collapse, from facility to nightmare, from where is the enemy to the enemy is the place. There is also an ethical design decision embedded in Doom's premise, one that shaped how the violence feels. In later reflections, John Carmack described pushing hard for demonic enemies in part because it removed moral ambiguity. You are not shooting civilians, you are not mowing down bystanders, you are not caught in a messy political scenario, you are fighting monsters that are meant to be unquestionably hostile. At the same time, he also acknowledged a streak of provocation in the imagery, a willingness to irritate the easily offended by leaning into pentagrams, goat-headed iconography, and the aesthetics of sacrilege. This is not the full explanation for why Doom looks the way it does, but it clarifies something important. Doom's hell is not only a fantasy realm, it is also a statement that games could be loud, crude, and confrontational, and that they did not need to ask permission. This connects to a famous line often attributed to Carmack about story in games, comparing it to story in a certain kind of adult film, expected to exist, but not the main attraction. Whether you treat the line as wisdom or as willful reduction, it captures Doom's priorities. Doom does have story, but it keeps story at the edges so the center can be sensation, speed, fear, discovery, and the pleasure of surviving something that does not care if you understand it. If Doom's narrative is a set of doors you open in your mind, then its monsters are the figures waiting behind those doors. They are also, more secretly, the instruments through which Doom teaches you how to move. The manual's enemy section is written with a kind of rough humor, but the descriptions reveal a careful taxonomy. There are the former humans, the possessed soldiers who still carry recognizable weapons. There are a narrative bridge as well as a combat threat, proof that hell does not merely invade, it converts. Then there are stronger variants, including former human sergeants carrying shotguns, walking weapons platforms that teach you early to respect line of sight. The implication is clear. This place has taken your co-workers and turned them into an ammo delivery system with teeth. Imps are the first full demonic infantry. Humanoid silhouettes, simple ranged attacks, and enough toughness to punish sloppy aim. They are Doom's first lesson in projectile dodging because they throw fireballs that demand lateral movement and timing. Then the game introduces demons, the iconic charging brutes, often remembered by their color and their behavior. They are not complex. They run at you fast and they bite. But that simplicity is exactly why they work. A charging demon turns any corridor into a test of nerve. If you panic, you die. If you hold your ground too long, you die. If you retreat without thinking, you may back into another threat. The demon's design is raw pressure, a monster that exists to collapse distance and force you to make decisions while your heart rate rises. Spectres, described as merely invisible, extend that pressure into uncertainty. They are a single concept made cruel. What if the charging threat is harder to perceive? They make you spray bullets into shadows and distrust your own vision. Lost souls, described as flaming flying skulls, change the geometry again. They do not demand that you manage a doorway. They demand that you manage the airspace in front of your face. Cacodemons, floating and grotesque, are the game's first truly iconic hell creature, a single-eyed orb that looks absurd until it attacks. It is both comical and unsettling, a reminder that Doom's horror is not elegant. It is chunky, noisy, and wrong in a very specific way. Then come the Barons of Hell, towering bruisers that serve as mid-bosses and gatekeepers. They are heavy enough that you cannot casually delete them with the early arsenal, and their presence changes the meaning of ammunition. When a Baron appears, Doom is asking you a question. Do you spend rockets now? Do you burn plasma if you have it? Do you kite the monster through space to conserve resources? Or do you accept damage as the price of speed? The Baron is not only an enemy, it is an economic event. The manual also includes a sly piece of tactical advice that points straight at Doom's deeper design. It suggests maneuvering demons into crossfire so they will attack each other, letting them do the work for you. This is not just a tip, it is an invitation to see monsters as pieces in a system rather than as isolated targets. Doom's infighting mechanic is one of the ways the game turns chaos into strategy. It allows a skilled player to survive overwhelming odds through manipulation, and it reinforces the fantasy that hell is hungry and ungovernable, a swarm that can turn on itself. Notably, Doom's most famous bosses are often left out of the manual's list, as if the game wants to preserve their shock. The Cybernetic Titan and the grotesque Brain-on-Legs mastermind are presented in players' events, not as entries in the catalogue. They function as punctuation marks at the ends of episodes, forcing you to apply everything you have learned about dodging and resource use under concentrated pressure. Even without extensive exposition, their presence tells a story. Hell is not only an invasion, it has leadership, experiment, some grotesque engineering of its own. The deeper you look, the more Doom's monster roster appears designed less for realism and more for readability. Each creature has a silhouette you can recognize at speed. Each attack profile creates a different kind of movement demand. Hit-scan enemies punish exposure. Projectile enemies punish predictable dodging. Melee charges punish hesitation. Flying threats punish tunnel vision. The point is not to create believable ecology. The point is to create a vocabulary of danger that the player can read instantly and respond to instinctively. Doom is a game that wants you to think with your hands. This is also why Doom's horror works even though it is fast. Traditional horror often relies on slowness, on anticipation, on the inability to fight back. Doom does the opposite. It gives you an arsenal, it gives you speed, it makes you powerful. And then it uses that power to generate a different kind of horror. The horror of being overwhelmed anyway. The horror of entering a room and realizing you made a mistake before the music even catches up. The horror of hearing a door open behind you while you are already wounded. Doom's fear is kinetic. It comes from momentum that cannot be paused. Visually, Doom's world is a fever-dream collage of industrial detail and occult intrusion. Metal panels sit beside bone textures. Warning stripes lead to altars. Computer rooms open into chambers that feel carved rather than constructed. The palette shifts from cold, tech-based grays and greens toward hellish reds and sickly browns. This is not subtle art direction, and that is part of the point. Doom is not whispering, it is shouting. It is building a world that feels like blasphemy rendered in pixels, a place where the logic of engineering has been replaced replaced by the logic of appetite. And yet, for all the imagery, Doom remains strangely minimalist about what the player should feel. It does not provide a moral monologue. It does not offer companions to react for you. It lets you project meaning into the gaps. That is why Doom's protagonist becomes less a character than a role, an embodiment of the player's forward motion. You are not here to negotiate with hell. You are here to move through it. This brings us to the edge of a transition. Doom ends not with closure, but with escalation. Even when you finish its infernal descent, the universe does not feel resolved, it feels opened. And that opening is exactly what Doom 2 exploits. Where Doom begins with a disaster on distant moons, Doom 2 drags the consequences home. It broadens the scale, thickens the density of combat, and transforms the series from a nightmare in a facility into an apocalypse with streets, spaceports, and crowds of monsters that feel like a population rather than a patrol. Doom ends like a fuse, disappearing into darkness. Doom 2 begins like a building already on fire. The shift is immediate, and it is the reason Doom 2 matters so much. The first game is isolation, a military outpost. Locked doors, distant moons, a sense that the universe is large and indifferent while you fight a private war inside narrow corridors. Doom 2 drags the horror into the familiar. The title itself, Hell on Earth, is not subtle. It promises escalation, and it delivers that escalation in the simplest narrative move imaginable. The demons are not merely in some far-off facility anymore. They are where you live. In broad strokes, Doom 2's story is a chase through collapsing civilization. You fight through an invaded city and toward a starport, because the human survivors need to evacuate. You secure access, you clear the path, you make the impossible possible, and the remaining humans escape. That should be the end of an action plot. Doom 2 refuses. The invasion source is discovered in your own hometown, a final insult and a final provocation. You go back into the ruins, push through the infestation, and finally enter hell again to cut the invasion off at its throat. The ending is not triumph so much as grim continuation. The sense that victory is never clean, and that closing one door simply reveals another. Doom's world is a system of gates, and the only way to end the war is to step through all of them. This larger premise is paired with a very practical reality. Doom 2 was built quickly, and it was built to be sold differently. The original Doom's shareware episode spread like a controlled infection, turning players into distributors. Doom 2 arrived as a boxed retail product, intended for store shelves, which gave it a different cultural footprint. It was easier to buy as a conventional purchase, and that matters because it positioned Doom not only as a phenomenon of the computer underground, but as a mainstream object, something that could sit in the same retail space as productivity software and family games, a loud, controversial box that seemed to dare adults to understand what their kids were doing at night. Technologically, Doom 2 is not a leap. It is the same basic engine philosophy, refined and pushed, and that decision to resist a major technical overhaul is part of Doom 2's identity. Doom 2 is the experience of the first game, turned up, stretched out, and often made meaner. It is the argument that content, pacing, and encounter design can create a sequel feeling even when the underlying machinery remains familiar. Some critics, even at the time, treated this as a weakness, calling it an expansion more than a true sequel. But history has been kinder to Doom 2 than that framing suggests, because Doom 2's changes are not decoratives. They reshape how the game plays, and they reshape what Doom becomes as a platform for other people's creativity. Doom 2 is one long campaign rather than a set of separate episodes. This structural choice seems small until you feel it over time. In the first Doom, an episode ends, you get a capstone fight, a text bridge, and a sense of completion before the next descent begins. Doom 2 is a marathon. It builds habits in the player. It wears down certainty. It asks you to manage resources and focus across a longer arc, and it has more room for tonal variety. City streets, industrial plants, surreal abstractions of public buildings, and then the full plunge into hellish architecture again. The level names suggest specific places, downtown, a refinery, a courthouse-like structure, but Doom 2 often treats place as an attitude rather than a faithful depiction. It is not a simulator of a city, it is a dream of a city after reality has been peeled away. If Doom 2's structure is a marathon, its defining moment is a single weapon. The super shotgun changes the entire emotional economy of Doom. It is not just a better shotgun, though it certainly feels like one. It is a choreography tool. 2 barrels mean one decision with immediate consequences. Step into danger, commit to the blast, and accept that you will need a brief moment to recover while the weapon cycles. In that cycle is Doom 2's tension. The super shotgun rewards boldness, but it punishes sloppy timing. It is devastating at close range and less reliable at distance, which means it does not replace the rest of your arsenal. It reshapes your priorities. It also reshapes the soundscape. The super shotgun's roar is not merely loud, it is final. It makes every encounter feel like it could be resolved in a single blunt exhale if you can get close enough. Doom 2's new enemies are designed in large part to answer this new power and to increase the variety of threats in larger spaces. Some of them are subtle evolutions. Some are monsters with a single cruel idea at the center. Together they form a roster that became the default language of classic Doom for decades, because so much community content would be built using Doom 2's bestiary as the baseline. The Chain Gunner is an escalation of a familiar concept, the possessed human with a gun. But the difference in feel is massive. A shotgun enemy is dangerous in a burst. A chain gunner is dangerous in a stream. The moment a chain gunner has line of sight, mistakes turn into shredded health. This changes how you move through any room with hit-scan threats. Doors become life-saving cover. Corners become strategy, not just geometry. In Doom 2, the most frightening sound is often not a demon's roar, but the sudden mechanical chatter of bullets, because it means you are exposed, and the game is not feeling forgivingism. The Revenant is Doom 2's invitation to panic, designed with an almost mischievous understanding of player psychology. It launches missiles that can pursue you, pressuring you to keep moving and to use architecture intelligently. It is not enough to strafe lazily. You must break line of sight, cut corners, and resist the urge to run in a straight line. In open spaces, a Revenant can turn the air itself into a problem you must solve. The Mancubus is the opposite kind of pressure, a heavy, slow artillery brute, hurling volleys that fill space and make certain routes temporarily unusable. You feel a room change when a Mancubus is present. It turns the arena into a series of not there, now there decisions, punishing players who try to stand still and trade damage like a tank. Doom 2 does not want you to tank, it wants you to dance. The Arachnotron is like a corrupted echo of the first game's cybernetic horrors, a brain mounted on a mechanical chassis, firing plasma in sustained bursts. Functionally, it is a mobile turret. Emotionally, it is a threat that makes you treat open areas with respect. In combination with other monsters, the Arachnotron becomes a supplier of constant pressure, forcing you to prioritize targets quickly. The Pain Elemental is Doom 2's way of making the battlefield feel like it is breeding. It spits lost souls into the world, converting time into danger. If you ignore it, a manageable fight becomes an air swarm. This monster teaches a specific kind of tactical urgency. Sometimes the correct play is not to kill what is closest, but to kill what will make everything worse if left alive. And then there is the Archvile, arguably the most influential monster design in Doom 2 and one of the most influential enemy concepts in shooter history. The Archvile does not merely deal damage, it creates dread. Its attack is telegraphed in a way that forces you to react, break line of sight, hide behind something solid, interrupt it, or accept severe punishment. And its secondary ability rewrites the rules of attrition. It can resurrect fallen monsters. That single mechanic adds an entirely new layer to Doom's combat language. Corpses become unstable. Clearing a room becomes a temporary statement rather than a permanent fact. The Archvile converts your past success into a resource it can steal. It is one of those designs that feels obvious after you see it and unimaginable before. A monster that punishes complacency not by hitting harder, but by making you doubt the finality of your own progress. There is also a smaller but meaningful addition to Doom 2's power-up ecosystem, items that refill you in a way that feels like a late-game mercy. Doom 2 is longer, fights can be denser, and the game occasionally gives you a resource surge that feels like permission to play aggressively again. Doom is always about momentum, and Doom 2 understands that momentum can stall if the player feels starved for too long. But the heart of Doom 2 is not only in its new toys, it is in its approach to levels. The phrase larger levels is often used to describe Doom 2, and it is accurate, but it understates the real shift. Doom 2's maps are more likely to be sprawling, interconnected, and occasionally puzzling in a way that frustrates some players and delights others. The first Doom tends to guide you with a clearer sense of flow, especially in its early episode. Doom 2 is more willing to make you feel lost, to turn exploration into a pressure cooker where the right door is a victory and the wrong turn is a sentence. This is not accidental. Doom 2 was built quickly, and level design under speed becomes a kind of improvisation. The game embraces that improvisational energy. Some maps feel like elegant combat puzzles. Others feel like architectural jokes, riddles made of vents and switches and doors that open elsewhere. This gives Doom 2 a distinct personality. It is less clean than Doom, but also more unpredictable. Certain maps became iconic because they make a single bold statement. There is a map that is essentially an arena with a simple, brutal premise. Two new heavy monsters introduced in a symmetrical space that forces you to learn their behavior immediately. It is Doom 2's way of saying, you are not easing into this, you are learning now. There is a map built around barrels, teaching you that the environment is an explosive instrument and also a trap that can punish your own aggression. There are city maps that try to evoke streets and blocks, sometimes successfully and sometimes in a surreal, abstract way, where you can feel the designers wrestling with what Earth should mean inside an engine built for bases and hell caves. There are late-game maps that become increasingly infernal, where progression feels like descending into an argument between flesh and geometry. The most notorious final map is famous not only for its boss, but for the way the fight works. Doom 2's last enemy is more like a structure than a creature. Doom 2 is deadly serious in its mood and completely unserious in its willingness to smuggle in prankish details. It is a game that wants to scare you and amuse itself at the same time. Doom 2's level design philosophy also leaned harder into what later communities would call slaughter, not always in the extreme modern sense, but in the willingness to put more monsters into the player's path and to create fights that feel like pressure waves rather than skirmishes. In Doom, you often clear clusters. In Doom 2, you more often manage crowds. This makes the importance of infighting, movement, and weapon selection even greater. The super shotgun is a crowd control tool. Rockets are a crowd control tool. The BFG becomes less a special occasion and more an answer to rooms that seem designed to dare you into using it. This escalation affects the tone of the player's competence fantasy. Doom is already a power fantasy under stress. Doom 2 turns the dial. It makes you feel like a veteran, not because the game flatters you, but because it throws situations at you that would have been absurd in the first game and expects you to solve them with the same basic mechanics. Doom 2 treats you as someone who already understands Doom's language. That is why it can be cruel quickly. It assumes you can read the map, read the monsters, read the ambush cues, and keep moving. The music amplifies this sense of veteran aggression. Where Doom's soundtrack often feels like a mixture of menace and propulsion, Doom 2's music frequently feels more like pure forward drive, a continued marriage between computerized instrumentation and heavy music attitude. In later interviews, the composer discussed how the team wanted the soundtrack to feel like metal energy and how he worked in the constraints of the era to capture that intensity while still writing music that functioned inside a game loop. The result is not simply songs, it is an engine of adrenaline. The music does not wait for you, it pushes you. Multiplayer is where Doom 2's more becomes cultural. Doom's deathmatch birthed a language. Doom 2 gave that language a larger dictionary, more weapons in circulation, more maps to fight over, more players now familiar with the etiquette and the cruelty of Doom combat. In deathmatch, the super shotgun becomes a close-quarters verdict. The chain gun becomes a suppression tool. Rockets become both power and risk. The BFG becomes a moral outrage, an agreement breaker, a thing that can end friendships for an evening. Doom 2's maps, even when they are awkward for single-player flow, often contain spaces that become memorable multiplayer arenas simply because of how they connect rooms and resources. People learned levels the way athletes learn a field. They learned spawns, choke points, and weapon routes. They learned to hear doors and interpret footsteps. They learned the shame of being ambushed while hunting for armor. Doom 2 did not merely host competition, it taught players to desire it. All of this made Doom 2 a foundation stone for modding. Because Doom 2 became widely available as a single commercial package, and because it included the expanded monster roster and the super shotgun, it turned into a standard target for community-made content. If you made a custom level set, Doom 2's assets and assumptions were often the default canvas. Over time, Doom as a modding ecosystem increasingly meant Doom 2 as a rule set. This is one of the quiet reasons Doom 2's legacy can feel even larger than the first games. Doom is the origin myth. Doom 2 is the common language. That common language produced subcultures. There were mappers who specialized in clever puzzles and traps, mappers who specialized in elaborate architecture, mappers who specialized in arenas packed with monsters to test raw combat skill. There were competitive communities that refined movement and aim into something almost surgical. There were cooperatives who treated megawads like shared expeditions. Doom 2 was not only played, it was inhabited, and then it was expanded, again and again, by people who loved it enough to build inside it. Officially, Doom 2 also grew extra limbs. Expansion packs and additional level collections extended the game's life in a more commercial way, and some of those releases were fascinating because they blurred a boundary. Levels made by outsiders, curated and commissioned, sitting in an official product. That boundary blur mattered. It implied that the community was not merely tolerated, it was valuable. Few games of the era treated player-made content as something that could stand beside the original work with a straight face. Doom 2's ecosystem encouraged that confidence. If Doom is lightning, Doom 2 is weather. It spreads across a wider horizon. It lasts longer. It contains more varied shapes of danger. It is less pristine, sometimes less elegant, and more willing to be messy. In that mess is a particular kind of authenticity, the feeling of developers racing to satisfy a world that had become hungry, and discovering that hunger could be fed not with reinvention, but with amplification, with sharper tools and meaner rooms. And that is why Doom 2 remains, for many players, the definitive classic Doom experience. Not because it replaces the first game's purity, but because it turns Doom into a full diet, long-form pressure, a deeper roster of threats, the Super Shotgun's brutal punctuation, and a campaign that feels like a tour of everything the engine can do when you stop being polite about pacing. In the final part, the story widens again. Doom did not stop at Doom 2. It fractured into official follow-ups, experiments, reimaginings, and modern reinventions that carried different philosophies, some leaning into horror, some into speed, some into spectacle, some into narratives. We will move from the classic era into the successors, with Doom's legacy as the thread, how the formula was preserved, how it was challenged, and why the name Doom still means a very specific kind of momentum even after decades of change. After Doom and Doom 2, the most interesting question is not simply what came next, but what became possible. Doom did not just popularize a viewpoint or a weapon. It popularized a relationship between player and space. It taught millions of people a new kind of literacy. How to read a room at speed, how to understand danger as geometry, how to treat sound as information, how to treat momentum as strategy. And it taught developers that the most important technology in a game is not the polygon count or the texture resolution, but the sensation of control, the feeling that your intentions reach the world without delay. This is why Doom's legacy is so wide that it can appear contradictory. Doom is remembered as a technical revolution, a cultural scandal, a genre blueprint, a multiplayer birthcry, and a modding utopia. These are all true, but what binds them together is simpler. Doom became a platform for intensity. It was the machine that made speed and fear feel crisp on a home computer. And once that machine existed, people used it for everything. In the years immediately following Doom 2, the world did what it always does with a new language. It imitated it until imitation became an industry. For a while, the phrase people used was not first-person shooter, it was Doom clone. That phrase can sound dismissive now, but at the time it was descriptive, almost flattering. It meant a game that tried to deliver Doom sensation, real-time first-person action with fast movement, maze-like levels, key hunts, secrets, and a heavy emphasis on gunplay. Developers across the industry studied Doom's rhythms the way musicians study a hit song. They copied its interface choices, its weapon rolls, its enemy silhouettes, its sound cues. Some of these games were forgettable, some were excellent. What matters is that Doom had created a recognizable form, and recognizable forms reproduced quickly. At the same time, Doom's influence pushed beyond imitation into infrastructure. The engine model, the separation of content from code, and the very idea that players could make new levels and share them helped change expectations about what a game could be after you bought it. Doom was not the first game to be modified, but it was one of the first to make modification feel like a natural extension of play. The result was a community that did not merely consume, it produced. The basic unit of Doom's community creativity was the WAD file, a container of data that could be replaced, expanded, and rearranged. Levels, textures, sounds, and later more elaborate changes could be packed into a form players could distribute. This format became the seed of 1,000 subcultures.
Some people made single maps, short and sharp like jokes. Some made full-length campaigns, later called megawads, designed to be played for hours and discussed like albums.
Some made total conversions, projects that transformed Doom into something so different that it barely resembled its source. The Doom community became a school of level design, and it taught through practice. If you wanted to learn pacing, you built fights. If you wanted to learn architecture, you built rooms. If you wanted to learn psychology, you built traps. Tools appeared, improved, and multiplied. Editors made map creation more accessible. Tutorials circulated. Forums and file archives became cultural hubs. People argued about what was fair, what was elegant, what was cheap, what was brilliant. They developed vocabulary, terms for different kinds of encounter design, different kinds of map flow, different kinds of visual style. They began to treat Doom's building blocks as a craft medium, like wood or paint. And because Doom was fast to load, fast to test, and built on a clear set of rules, it supported iteration in a way many later engines would struggle to match. Doom rewarded the impatient artist. You could build a room, test it, hate it, rebuild it, and test again, all in the same night. This is one reason Doom's modding scene did not fade. It became intergenerational. People learned from older maps and reacted to them. They made tributes and parodies. They made deliberately brutal challenges and deliberately gentle explorations. They made maps that chased realism and maps that chased abstraction. As computers improved, the community also expanded the engine through source ports, modified executables that could run Doom with new features, bug fixes, or higher resolutions, depending on philosophy. Different ports reflected different values. Some aimed to be historically faithful, preserving the original behavior and timing so the game felt exactly like it did on the old hardware. Others aimed to be expansive, enabling new scripting, new monsters, new rendering techniques, and modern convenience features. This meant that Doom slowly became plural. There was Doom as it was. There was Doom as it could have been. There was Doom as a base for entirely new games. Source ports also helped preserve Doom in a practical sense. As operating systems changed, as old hardware vanished, Doom remained playable because people cared enough to keep it alive. That preservation is not an accident of corporate stewardship. It is a community achievement. Doom became the kind of game that is always available, always resurrected, always recompiled, always one click away from running again. And then the running became a joke, and the joke became a cultural fact. It runs Doom became a meme because it was true often enough to be funny. People put Doom on devices that had no reason to host a demon-infested moon base, small screens, strange appliances, gadgets meant for one simple task. The impulse behind the joke is the same impulse that shaped Doom's modding scene, a delight in portability, in technical challenge, and in the idea that a game can be less a product than a test pattern for ingenuity. Doom became a benchmark not only for hardware capability, but for programmer personality. If you could make Doom run somewhere unexpected, you proved something about yourself and about the machine. Doom also helped shape multiplayer culture in a way that now feels obvious but once felt transformative. The first wave of Doom deathmatch was local and physical. People dragged computers into the same room. They ran cables, they configured networks, they turned living spaces into temporary arenas. This was not only gaming, it was social engineering. Doom taught people how to host, how to compete, how to argue, how to reconcile, how to demand a rematch. It created small rituals, the moment of loading in, the scramble for weapons, the grudges based on a single rocket. Doom multiplayer was raw, often chaotic, and intensely personal because you were usually playing against someone whose face you could see. That physical multiplayer culture fed into the broader growth of competitive play in shooters. Doom did not invent competition, but it provided a vivid template, fast matches, skill expression, map knowledge, and an emphasis on movement that made the best players look almost supernatural. If you watched someone who truly understood Doom, you saw a different game than the one beginners played. You saw angle control, resource control, prediction, and a kind of aggression that still looked calm. Competition made Doom a sport long before esports became a familiar word. Another branch of Doom's afterlife is speedrunning, which fits Doom's personality so perfectly that it can feel inevitable. Doom's end-of-level statistics and its culture of time and completion naturally encouraged players to replay maps until they were clean. Soon, players were not only trying to finish, they were trying to finish elegantly, quickly, with minimal damage, with maximum kills, with all secrets, in different categories with different constraints. Doom's demo recording culture helped formalize this. Runs could be shared as small files that captured input rather than video, which made them easy to distribute and easy to study. The community treated these performances like scripts and like music, learning rotes, refining technique, and pushing limits. Speedrunning also reveals something important about Doom's design integrity. Doom's maps are not just spaces, they are systems. Once you understand the systems deeply, you can move through them like a locksmith. Triggers can be manipulated. Monsters can be coaxed into advantageous positions. Damage can be minimized through movement discipline. Randomness can be managed. Even when a run goes wrong, the best players do not collapse into panic. They improvise, still reading geometry, still converting danger into tempo. Doom's speedrunning culture is basically Doom's original fantasy intensified mastery through motion. Of course, Doom's legacy is not only technical or playful, it is also cultural, and sometimes that culture turns sour. Doom arrived during a period of moral panic about games. Violent imagery was becoming more visible. Parents were becoming more aware that the computer, once seen as a tool for homework or work, could also be a portal into gore and occult symbolism. Doom's demonic imagery made it an easy target for suspicion, especially among adults who did not play games and did not understand how stylized, abstract, and rule-bound the experience actually was. Doom was treated in some circles as a corrupting influence rather than a game. Later, after real-world tragedies, Doom was sometimes dragged into arguments as a symbol, blamed not because it was uniquely connected to violence, but because it was widely known and easy to point at. The recurring pattern of scapegoating is familiar. A complex human problem is reduced to a simple cultural object, and that object is treated as if it explains everything. This does not do justice to victims, it does not do justice to reality, and it does not even do justice to the game itself. What Doom actually taught most players was not cruelty. It taught spatial thinking, rapid decision-making, and self-chosen challenge. It was a game about demons, not a manual for living. Still, it is worth acknowledging that Doom's impact was real. It did change what violence looked like in games. It did normalize certain intensities, and it did show the industry that shock could sell. Doom is not responsible for the worst things people do, but it is part of the story of how digital violence became a mainstream aesthetic. Any honest legacy must hold both truths. Doom is not a cause, but Doom is influential. While the community expanded, the official series also evolved, and not always in a straight line. In the classic era, one of the most interesting official developments was the way community content began to blend into the commercial identity of Doom. Collections of levels were marketed as official or semi-official expansions, and they often showcased the fact that Doom's most devoted players were also its best designers. Some of these releases became famous for their difficulty and for their distinct personalities. One leaned toward controlled industrial challenge, another leaned toward vicious traps and relentless combat pressure. Together they demonstrated something crucial. Doom could be interpreted. The engine was not a single style, it was a medium. Then came Doom 64, a project that often feels like a parallel universe. It was built for a console audience and arrived with its own atmosphere. Its visual style leaned harder into darkness, into colored lighting, into a heavier sense of dread. Its audio identity, rather than relying on energetic riffs, often pursued an eerie ambient mood, making the world feel more like a haunted space than a metal album cover. Doom 64 also introduced unique enemy and weapon variations, giving the familiar bestiary a new face. For years it lived in the shadow of the mainline PC games, but over time it became beloved for the way it reframed Doom's moods. It proved that Doom's core could support a slower, thicker horror atmosphere without losing its identity. The biggest official pivot, though, was Doom 3. Doom 3 is the moment when Doom's identity was questioned from inside its own name. Instead of chasing Doom's original speed above all, Doom 3 emphasized horror, darkness, and tension. Movement felt heavier. Encounters were more scripted. The world leaned into cinematic presentation. Technology, once again, was central. Dynamic lighting and shadow were used not just as decoration, but as a primary tool of fear. The base felt less like a game maze and more like a detailed environment with audio logs, story fragments, and a stronger sense of lived-in space. This shift split audiences, and the split is revealing. For one group, Doom 3 was a thrilling modern horror shooter. a game that finally treated Doom's premise as genuinely frightening. For another group, it felt like Doom wearing someone else's clothes. If Doom is about propulsion, then Doom 3 often felt like hesitation. A famous point of discussion was the flashlight, a tool that made darkness tactile but also created friction. The player had to manage visibility as a resource, which fit horror but disrupted the smooth forward aggression some fans considered essential. What Doom 3 demonstrates, more than anything, is that Doom's identity is not simply demons and shotguns, it is tempo. Doom 3 altered tempo, and in doing so it exposed how much the classic formula depended on speed as an emotional constant. Even players who loved Doom 3 often described it with vocabulary different from classic Doom: dread, suspense, atmosphere, story. That is not failure, that is divergence. Doom 3 is Doom interpreted through a horror lens rather than an action metal lens. In the following years, Doom's presence became both ubiquitous and oddly quiet. The classics remained famous, endlessly ported and replayed. Doom 3 had its own life and revisions, but there was a sense of waiting. If Doom was to return in a way that felt culturally loud again, it would need to define what Doom meant to a modern audience. That return came with Doom 2016. Doom 2016 is best understood as a thesis statement written in motion. It asks, what if we take the spirit of the original and express it with modern problem? The way many shooters had drifted toward passive play, regeneration, and safe pacing. Doom 2016 argued that violence could be a momentum engine and that the player should feel like a predator as much as a survivor. It also resurrected the idea that levels could contain secrets, collectibles, and hidden challenges, inviting exploration without turning the game into a slow scavenger hunt. The modern Doom did not want to become an open world. It wanted to remain a series of pressure chambers connected by curiosity. The soundtrack played a large role in this identity. Where classic Doom relied on the character of MIDI and the player's hardware, Doom 2016 used modern audio production to create a thick, mechanical metal roar that felt like a machine made angry. The music responded to combat intensity, swelling and grinding, turning fights into performances. It was, in a sense, a modernization of what Doom's music always did, not narrate but propel. Doom 2016 also treated its protagonist in a way that fascinated longtime fans. The Doom Marine, often called Doom Guy in the community, became a mythic figure, less a human soldier and more a force of nature. The game used small gestures and environmental storytelling to communicate attitude, sometimes with humor, sometimes with contempt for the demons, sometimes with impatience toward exposition. It acknowledged lore while also mocking the idea that lore should slow you down. In doing so, it found a balance that felt true to the classic game's minimalism while still satisfying modern expectations that a game should provide some narrative texture. Then Doom Eternal arrived, and it complicated the formula again. If Doom 2016 is about returning to classic aggression with modern polish, Doom Eternal is about turning that aggression into a fully articulated system. Eternal increases mobility, more vertical movement, more tools for traversal, more ways to control space. It also increases complexity. Resources become more segmented. The player is encouraged to rotate through weapons and abilities, using each one to solve a particular combat need. Combat becomes less about one favorite gun and more about a toolkit used with intention. Some players adore this because it turns Doom into a high-speed puzzle, a constant improvisation where mastery looks like choreography. Others miss the simpler brutality of Doom 2016 or the even simpler brutality of Doom and Doom 2. The division is familiar now. Doom's identity is still tempo, but tempo can be expressed in different ways. Eternal expresses tempo as constant decision-making, and that can feel exhilarating or exhausting depending on taste. What Eternal unquestionably demonstrates is that Doom is not trapped in nostalgia. Doom can absorb modern design ideas, even those that would seem alien to classic fans, and still remain recognizably Doom if the core sensation survives speed, pressure, and the refusal to let the player rest for long. Across all these official changes, the community continued, sometimes quietly and sometimes loudly, to do what it always did: build, remix, reinterpret, and preserve. Classic Doom mapping never stopped. Source ports continued to evolve. New megabods arrived that rivaled commercial releases in scope and craft. Some aimed to feel like lost episodes from the original era. Some aimed to modernize the feel with advanced features. Some were experimental art pieces in the shape of corridors. Doom became a living museum where new exhibits appeared constantly, curated by whoever cared enough to share. It is also worth noting how Doom's technical legacy extended beyond the series itself. Its software's approach to engines and licensing helped shape the broader industry's relationship with technology. Many developers learned to think in terms of engines as reusable foundations. They learned that performance and feel could be a competitive advantage. They learned that multiplayer code could be central, not optional. They learned that tools matter. And they learned, perhaps most importantly, that a game's long life can be built not only by official sequels, but by giving players room to participate. Doom influenced level design as a discipline. The idea that a map could be both a place and a puzzle, both a combat arena and a narrative tone poem, became common. Doom influenced weapon design. Many shooters still build their arsenals on the logic Doom refined weapons as roles, each with a clear purpose and a strong emotional signature. Doom influenced enemy design. The importance of silhouette readability, attack telegraphing, and role-based placement remains foundational. Doom influenced pacing. The alternation of exploration and violence, the use of ambush and release, the use of secrets as a second layer of engagement became standard. Even Doom's limitations became influential. The way classic Doom handled vertical aiming, the way it emphasized horizontal movement and spatial dodging, shaped an entire tradition of arena shooter design where speed and positioning matter more than cover and precision aiming at distance. Later games would either embrace that tradition or react against it. In both cases, Doom was the reference point. So why does Doom still matter beyond nostalgia? Because Doom solves a problem that never goes away: how to make movement feel meaningful from second to second. Many games can provide spectacle, many games can provide content, many games can provide emotion through story. Doom provides meaning through action. It makes the smallest decisions, whether to step left or right, whether to push forward or retreat, feel like the essence of play. Doom is not primarily about being told you are a hero. It is about earning the right to keep moving. And Doom's world, for all its pixelated abstraction, still feels strangely pure. It has no pretense of being a life simulator. It does not ask you to craft or grind or manage menus for hours before you are allowed to feel skill. Doom gives you the tool, gives you the room, gives you the threat, and says, now. That directness is a kind of honesty. It is also why Doom remains enjoyable even when stripped of historical context. You can hand Doom to someone who does not care about the history of shooters, and the person will still understand within minutes what is compelling: the speed, the danger, the immediate feedback, the way the game seems to dare you to become better. Doom also endures because it contains a paradox that players find endlessly satisfying. You are powerful but not safe. You are fast but not invulnerable. You have guns, but you can still be cornered. Doom offers empowerment without comfort. It offers mastery without mercy. When you win, it feels earned. When you lose, it feels like information. In the end, Doom's greatest legacy may be that it taught the industry and taught players to respect the feel of a game as a serious artistic and technical problem. Doom is frequently described with superlatives, and many of them are deserved. But its most important achievement is not that it was the first at something. It is that it made a particular kind of play feel inevitable once you experienced it. It made speed and space feel like they belonged together. It made fear and aggression feed each other. It made a computer for the length of a level feel like a haunted machine that you could outsmart with your hands. Doom begins with a door sliding open in a metal corridor and ends decades later as a door that never fully closes. Every time someone loads a classic map, every time someone releases a new megawad, every time someone argues about which Doom is the truest Doom, the series proves the same point. Doom is not a relic, it is a living idea. It is the belief that movement can be music, that a room can be a story, and that hell is most interesting not as a place you visit, but as a pressure you learn to navigate at full speed.